Caricom heads go into a second day of meetings. Earlier, they argued strongly for dialogue in Venezuela. At least 55 are now dead after an airstrike on a migrant shelter in Libya. The UN says it was deliberate. And the West Indies make a strong start in their World Cup cricket match against Afghanistan. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez from Quito and this is From the South. We begin in St. Lucia, where Caricom Conference of Heads of Government has been convened to coincide with Caricom Day. The day marks the signing on July 4th, 1973, of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which created the Caribbean Community and Common Market. At this moment, meetings and workshops are in progress. Among the items the heads of government will discuss are the Caricom single market and economy. It's expected that measures to enhance this market will be agreed on. Our correspondent Alison Kentish reports on the second day of the Caricom summit.
Caricom leaders will be meeting in closed sessions over the next 2 days. However, the Caricom Secretariat has been forthcoming about just what is on their agenda for discussion. From 9 o'clock this morning, they have been meeting in a special working group. They are expected to break at 1 o'clock and resume for a special caucus at 3 p.m. The Caricom Secretariat issued a press release that states that the leaders will be focusing on the implementation of the Caricom single market and economy, and other matters down for deliberations include efforts to enhance cooperation among states in tackling crime and in addressing other security concerns, strengthening Caricom's presence in Africa, and financing for the Sustainable Development Goals. The heads will meet with Norway's Prime Minister and the Secretary General of the United Nations today to discuss a sustainable ocean economy and tackling pollution. Foreign affairs issues include bolstering Caricom's stance and assistance as a mediator in the ongoing issues in Venezuela and also tackling Venezuela-Guyana and Belize-Guatemala border issues. 11 heads of state are present at the summit along with ministerial country representatives.
That was Alison Kentish from St. Lucia. On Wednesday, Caricom member states reaffirmed their non-negotiable policy of non-interference in the political situation in Venezuela. This was the firm statement by Caricom's outgoing chairman, Dr. Timothy Harris, during his opening address. Dr. Harris commended Caricom nations that have supported Venezuela during this time, while he maintains that the region remains a zone of peace. Dr. Harris, who is also the Prime Minister of St. Kitts, says when it comes to Venezuela's affairs, Caricom must play a role of honest broker.
International contact group on several occasions, while our foreign ministers have engaged with Venezuelan opposition representatives. We have consistently argued that the cardinal principles to undergird a resolution of the political crisis in Venezuela should include: 1. Non-interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela. 2. The inviolability of the sovereign state. 3. Respect for democracy, rule of law, and the Constitution of Venezuela. And fourthly, peace and resolution of conflict. The Montevideo mechanism provides a guide to achieve this peaceful resolution. Its four imperatives are dialogue, negotiation, commitment, and implementation. Speaking to dialogue between both parties, I must commend the efforts of the Norwegian government to bring the two sides together in an attempt to end the impasse and allow the country to return again to stability. Venezuela is our neighbor, and our member states are being affected by the crisis. For us, this is not a geopolitical game of chess. It is a situation creating real hardships for millions of people right on our doorstep, fostering instability in our already fragile economies and exacerbating criminal activity.
The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres zeroed in on the issue of climate change when he addressed the Caricom summit opening. Guterres has called for collective advocacy in the Caribbean to address rising global temperatures and ocean degradation.
Climate-related natural disasters grow in frequency and severity. The risks to families and to development overall will only intensify. And the Caribbean experience makes abundantly clear that we must urgently reduce global emissions and work collectively to ensure that global temperature rise does not go beyond 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And that is why I'm asking all leaders from government and the private sector to present plans at my Climate Action Summit, or at the latest by December 2020, to cut greenhouse emissions by 45% by 2030 and get to carbon neutrality by 2050.
And Caricom's Secretary General lamented that measures which are supposed to be implemented under the Caribbean single market are not happening fast enough.
We have been engaged in a challenging task to create one market out of 12 developing economies, each of which is at different levels of development. We have persevered and we have made progress. However, we are lagging behind the deadlines agreed to in the implementation plan. It is in our interest to accelerate this process and to create a competitive regional economy. We have brought on board the private sector, labor, civil society, representatives of whom will engage with heads of government at this meeting.
Grenada is refuting claims that it is dealing with an influx of Venezuelan migrants. Assistant Police Commissioner Jesmond Prince issued the disclaimer last week. This follows an announcement from the U.S. that its naval hospital ship, Comfort, will offer services to the island during a 5-month humanitarian mission to countries overwhelmed by Venezuelans. In response, Prince said Venezuelans that visit Grenada do so for vacation and return home. Grenada's tourism authority also recorded a decline in Venezuelans arriving in the country for 2019.
Got an hour to wait before my tour.
Social organizations from Venezuela have condemned the effects of sanctions imposed on the country. They met the UN Special Rapporteur for Poverty on the margins of the Human Rights Council in Geneva.
We are participating in the 41st session of the U.S. Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland, with the Special Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty. We've held a meeting and we've discussed the situation of human rights in Venezuela. We've said that the deteriorating conditions for Venezuelans since 2014 until now are directly linked to the application of coercive measures against the country. We've asked the Special Rapporteur to visit Venezuela as President Nicolas Maduro invited all the organizations related so they can see for themselves the real situation. We've also asked for their support for the national dialogue and for peace, a fundamental issue for human rights in our country. Today, the coercive measures have a direct impact in the levels of poverty and should be sanctioned by the entire international community.
Guyana's president has invited the opposition leader to hold talks later on Thursday about the appointment of a new Elections Commission chairman. The matter has been on the political front burner for months. Last week, the Elections Commission chairman demitted office after a recent court ruling found that his appointment was flawed. A new appointment will be critical as Guyana is facing nearly early elections because of a no-confidence motion passed last December. We'll take a short break, but when we come back, deforestation in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil skyrockets under current President Jair Bolsonaro. Don't go away. Human rights organizations in Colombia have criticized the role of local and transnational companies during the country's armed conflict. They say they helped to force thousands of campesinos, indigenous people, and Afro-Colombians from their homes.
The armed conflict in Colombia displaced about 8 million people, most of them campesinos, as well as indigenous and Afro communities. Paramilitary groups forced them off their land, which was then often taken over by companies. The peace agreements were meant to give them compensation, but little has happened.
There should have been a large-scale return of land to those who were displaced, but there has been no clear policy to do this. President Duque doesn't seem to want to upset the companies. Some companies have enjoyed total impunity after seizing land in a very bloody way and breaking all of the agricultural and environmental regulations.
In recent years, human rights reports have identified almost 70 companies that appear to have appropriated land illegally. 3 of the worst offenders are Anglo Shanti, Bancolombia, and the Argos Cement Company.
Argos has been condemned 12 times for stealing land in the region of Montes de Maria. In fact, it used 2 other companies to occupy the land illegally. It is not allowed to accumulate land which was meant to be handed out to the poor farmers with no land. But they use these maneuvers to do just that.
Another guilty company is that belonging to the president of the airline Avianca, Herman Efromovich. The Constitutional Court ordered him to hand back 5,600 hectares that belonged to the nation and were earmarked for campesinos forced off their land. But he hasn't complied.
We have been trying to enforce the order for more than 2 years, but the National Land Agency and the company are not cooperating and are not respecting the court order. As a result, more than 240 campesinos have still not been able to return to that land.
Members of the ruling Democratic Center Party claim there is a cartel of false victims. But a report by the Forjando Futuros Foundation says that 98% of the claimants have been recognized as victims, while 89% of those who oppose restitution themselves benefited from illegal land seizures.
About 25% of the land restitution orders have criticized the role of individuals, companies, public officials, and court officers who took part in the land grabs.
The Special Jurisdiction for Peace says that third parties, including companies, have until the 9th of September to appear before this peace court to answer for human rights violations during the armed conflict. If they don't, they should be tried in the normal courts, the same courts which so far have granted them total impunity.
At least 26 people have lost their lives after a fishing vessel capsized off the coast of Honduras. The incident, which has been described as one of the country's worst accidents at sea, happened near the town of Puerto Lempira. A search and rescue operation for other possible victims is underway. 47 people have so far been rescued. Local media reports say that the accident might have been caused by bad weather. At least 5 people were killed and 3 are missing in Haiti after heavy rains flooded the capital. 3 were found dead in the Cité Soleil neighborhood, while 2 others died elsewhere in the capital. 5 people were also seriously injured when a wall collapsed under the weight of the downpour. Bolivia's main opposition candidate for the presidency, Carlos Mesa, has allegedly managed to fundraise nearly $10 million for his campaign. But critics say such amount is unheard of for a single candidate in a small country like Bolivia. Our correspondent Freddy Morales from La Paz has the details.
The financing of election campaigns in Bolivia has become a subject of controversy after the main opposition candidate, Carlos Mesa, has announced that he had managed to fundraise nearly $10 million for his presidential campaign. Critics say this amount is way too excessive for a single candidate in a country with such a small economy as Bolivia. People have also criticized the way Mesa has allegedly collected his funds, such as social events or sympathizer parties. The government of Evo Morales, along with the Electoral Commission, have called for an investigation into Mesa's campaign funds. Other parties and candidates also expressed their surprise over such an amount of funds. Meanwhile, Carlos Mesa has denied all accusations and refused to give further details about his campaign fundraising. All in all, the real cost of election campaigns have always been a mystery in Bolivia.
Freddy Morales from Bolivia. Deforestation in Brazil's Amazon rainforest skyrocketed to 88% in June when compared to the same period last year, and is leading to large forest fires across the region. This is the second consecutive month that deforestation has risen considerably in Brazil. Environmentalists warn that this is due to the policies of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, who has continuously called for more extractivism in the Amazon. Bolsonaro is also known for criticizing the country's environmental enforcement agency for handing out too many fines. Brazil is home to 60% of the Amazon, the world's largest tropical rainforest.
At this time, the main culprit for the environmental problems in Brazil is sitting inside the presidential palace, in charge of the country. Therefore, all of our attention is resisting, so as to not allow this regression to be implemented. As the absurdity of deforestation increases again, deforestation must be avoided. It is no longer tolerated. We can develop the country without deforestation.
Now we head to the U.S., where the government is once again threatening undocumented migrants with massive deportations after July 4th. And even supposed sanctuary states like New York and New Jersey are no longer seen as safe.
After Trump's announcement that federal agents will soon start massive raids against undocumented migrants in the U.S., fear has gripped many migrants, especially those with children.
They go to places where we work, and they can find out where we live as well. Our situation is quite difficult, but let's hope things get better for migrants in this country.
With the president that we have now, with Donald Trump, the laws has been stricter and the problem has gotten more difficult. Now everyone is afraid.
Despite the fear, immigrants like Ruben take the risk of going out to work to help their family.
Up until now, we continue working and supporting our families. That's why we came to this country.
On the streets, people are afraid of raids by ICE. Migrants who arrived more than 30 years ago say the United States is no longer the country of opportunity.
There has been a big change. It used to be better before. There were many more benefits. But this president is changing many things, and we don't want that.
They encounter more obstacles because the laws are stricter now. People used to come here, but they weren't deported like they are now.
New York and New Jersey are considered sanctuary states for undocumented migrants. But migrant organizations say nobody is now safe from deportation. They are advising people to get legal advice.
Who are they meant to leave their children with? If they have a house and no papers, it's very difficult. And if they have a bank account, they will have to deal with that as well.
According to official statistics, there are more than 500,000 migrants with deportation orders who have not yet left the country.
Coming up, Mexico's Vaquitas are now on the UNESCO list of World Heritage in danger. Stay with us.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
join us again, so let's continue. The death toll has risen to at least 55 from Tuesday night's airstrike on a detention center holding migrants in Libya. Women and children are among the dead, with more than 130 people injured in the bombing. The United Nations Security Council has strongly condemned the airstrike. Speaking after an emergency council meeting on Libya, UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet said the strike on the facility was a deliberate act and not a mistake, as both sides knew the location and coordinates of the facility. Peru's ambassador to the UN Security Council, Gustavo Mexacuadra, said the council is yet to agree on what actions to take against the perpetrators.
There were refugees and migrants, and we all condemn that. We haven't agreed on an element for the press. Maybe we'll have a press statement, but we are still discussing it. I think also we all agree on the issue that Ghassan Salamé efforts need to be supported, but I don't want to tell all the areas where we agree on an agreement.
Nigeria is set to become the latest country to sign the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. On Wednesday, the government announced that President Muhammadu Buhari will sign the agreement at the forthcoming African Union Summit to be held in Niger. The announcement will give a boost to the ambitious project that seeks to integrate African economies by eliminating tariffs on 90% of goods traded between signatories to the agreement. Nigeria was one of the 3 countries that had initially declined to sign the agreement in fear of exposing its manufacturers to greater competition. Following a coup attempt against a regional government, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has taken strong measures to restore stability in the country. Our correspondent Matuba Matlaji explains why Ethiopia's stability is crucial for the region.
Ethiopia can be easily called the capital of the African continent by virtue of it having the African Union headquarters there in Addis Ababa. And in recent months, we've seen Ethiopia setting an example when it comes to diplomacy, with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed choosing to have more reforms than we have ever seen in most of the African countries. Has a 50-50% of the cabinet we have in Ethiopia a woman president, even though it's a ceremonial duty. But this is something that we don't see often in Africa. Now, Ethiopia on the surface looks great, but it's got layered and complicated politics. In recent months, again, we saw Ethiopia opening its borders now with Eritrea, a long-time enemy, but they still have problems in that country where diplomacy looks great, but the relationship between the 2 countries remain very difficult. Ethiopia also has the highest number of displaced people internally in the whole world, and that is because of ethnic violence that's been unfolding in that country for many, many years. It's the ripple effect of the many years of autocratic regime that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is trying to change. Now, the latest news coming out of Ethiopia is the attempted coup, which is a pushback to the reforms that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been trying to introduce. But we know that they've since contained that situation, and they've assured the member states of the African Union that the situation there is much more stable than it has ever been. But now the irony of all of this is that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has to use the tactics of the autocratic regime that he replaced with turning off internet in the country and justifying it by saying this is how he's going to contain law and order in the country. But it remains to be seen if the stability will remain, because there are people who are still loyal to the previous regime, but there are more people loyal to the reforms of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, including the chief of the army who died in that coup attempt. But there's more support for Abiy Ahmed's government than we've ever seen before after this attempted coup. So Ethiopia is a really important player in diplomacy on the African continent. It's back to your studio.
Our correspondent Matuba Matlaji. Now, the habitat for the critically endangered Vaquita porpoise in Mexico has been added to UNESCO's list of World Heritage in danger. With only 10 vaquitas left in the world, UNESCO hopes the listing will drive support and financing from governments to save its habitat in the Gulf of California in Mexico. The vaquita's population has plummeted due to illegal fishing with gill nets. Even though they are not the targets, the marine mammals get entangled in them and drown. And we end with sports. Afghanistan is chasing 312 runs to beat West Indies as the teams face off in today's Cricket World Cup match. Afghanistan got an early blow with Kemar Roach dismissing skipper Gulbaring Naib, who hit it straight to Evan Lewis. Earlier, a late flourish from Jason Holder and Nicholas Puran saw West Indies cross the 300-run mark. Shai Hope was the top run getter for the side. Now Afghanistan needs 312 to win. And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria. And you can also join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.